dust and whispers. A guttural sound escaped Clara's throat, lost to the tempestuous roar of the approaching dust cloud. The barn's aged timbers groaned under the assault as the wind shrieked, hammering the rusted roof. Each blast felt like a bruising punch. Sweat glued fiery auburn tendrils to her brow, and her fingers, locked on the stall's rail, were bloodless. "Please, not now," she choked out, her pleas swallowed by the escalating chaos. "Just not." But her body betrayed her. Another contraction slammed into her, an agonizing surge threatening to drown her. She squeezed her eyes tight, the faces of Redemption's counsel looming in her mind, their severe judgments carved into every line. "Clara Walker, you are banished. Your transgressions pollute this town." The pronouncement echoed, a relentless condemnation, a brand seared into her memory. Transgressions. They cloaked their condemnation in euphemisms. One reckless night, a confluence of solitude and potent spirits at the harvest festival. A single mistake flowering into this, life clawing its way into being within the confines of a decaying barn, miles from grace. A wagon, meager supplies, and a harsh edict never darkened their doorstep again. Redemption purged its perceived imperfections. The pain sharpened a searing, insistent blade. She bore down, grunting with each surge, her breath ragged. A nearby you bleated frantically, sensing the primal struggle. Clara envied the creature's simple, unburdened existence. She carried the weight of both. A memory surfaced, her mother, a bedrock of strength, guiding her through lambing season long ago. Easy, Clara. Breathe with her. Work with life, not against it. Where was that fortitude now? Where was her mother's steady hand? Gone like so much else swept away. The world outside dissolved into ochre. The dust storm, a ravenous beast of whirling grit and debris, descended. It pummeled the barn, hungry to devour it. The air thickened, each breath labored. Then a new intensity, a ripping, fiery agony that triggered a cry. And then a sound emerged, a fragile, mewling sound that defied the storm's fury. A baby, her hands trembling, she reached down and drew the slick, squirming form to her chest. A daughter, tiny, vulnerable, miraculous. She cradled the delicate head, an overwhelming surge of protectiveness consuming her. Death before allowing harm to befall this child. But respite was fleeting. Another contraction, more forceful than the last, seized her. She wasn't finished. Fear constricted her throat. Twins. It should have been apparent. Her mother had known the bond. The irony bit deep, condemned for perceived sin, now granted or burdened with double the responsibility. She strained again, her body a symphony of protest. The barn spiraled, a dizzying tableau of dust and shadows. She teetered on the edge of consciousness, fading. "No," she rasped, her voice cracking. "Not yet." She pictured the infant in her arms, the other life still struggling to break free. She had to endure. For them. Drawing on a reservoir of strength she hadn't known she possessed, she pushed one final time. Another cry, this one deeper, resonating with nascent power. Another baby, a son. She collapsed back, spent, gasping for air, the two tiny bodies nestled against her. Dust cascaded, a fine layer coating everything. It settled in her hair, stung her eyes, coated her tongue. But none of it mattered. She had persevered. They had persevered. Gazing at the tempest raging outside, she considered names. Names that acknowledged their brutal genesis, yet also captured the burgeoning hope within her soul. "Hope," she murmured, stroking the girl's wispy hair. "That's you, little one. Hope." And for the boy, the one radiating a quiet resolve, even in infancy, River. Hope and River, born in a dust storm, ostracized from redemption. But they were hers, and she would shield them, whatever the price. The storm continued its assault, but within the dilapidated barn, a delicate light persisted. A light of love, of tenacity, of a mother's unwavering commitment. The dust and the whispers couldn't extinguish it. Not yet. A roof against the sky. The barn groaned, a low, mournful sound that vibrated through Clara's bones. Rain lashed against the already weakened walls, finding its way through cracks and splinters, spitting onto the dusty floor. Hope, nestled in the crook of her left arm, whimpered. River, on her right, slept on, oblivious. There, there, Clara murmured, her voice rough from disuse and the grit still clinging to her throat. Mama's here, Mama. The word felt foreign, yet powerful, a shield against the storm and the loneliness that threatened to consume her. These tiny beings, born in exile, were hers. Hope, a fragile flame ignited in the darkness. And River, a current of life flowing against the odds. She traced their names in the dust with a trembling finger. The wind howled, a banshee's wail that clawed at the barn's flimsy structure. A section of the roof, already compromised, lifted slightly, then slammed back down with a sickening crack. Clara's heart leaped in her throat. This wasn't just a dust devil. This was a full-blown tempest, determined to tear apart everything in its path. She needed to act, and fast. Carefully, she shifted the babies to a slightly drier corner, lining it with the least tattered remnants of her blanket. Be good for Mama, she whispered, though they couldn't possibly understand. Then she moved. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle aching from the birth and the relentless labor that had followed. But the fear for her children overrode the pain. She grabbed a length of thick rope from the corner, rope she'd intended to use for mending fences, another task left undone. Now, it would have to serve a different purpose. The barn door was the weakest point. It hung precariously on rusted hinges, threatening to buckle under the force of the wind. Clara wrestled with the rope, her fingers numb and clumsy. She looped it around the door's frame, then through the nearest support beam, pulling with all her might. The wood groaned, but held. She repeated the process, crisscrossing the rope like a makeshift net, reinforcing the barrier against the storm's fury. Splinters bit into her hands, drawing blood, but she ignored the pain. Hope started to cry, a thin, reedy sound that was almost lost in the wind's roar. Hush, little one, Clara said, her voice strained. Mama's working. Next, she turned her attention to the walls. The gaps between the planks were wide enough to let the rain and the wind seep through. She remembered a stack of old feed sacks in the loft, discarded and forgotten. Climbing the rickety ladder was an ordeal, each rung a painful reminder of her weakened state. But she forced herself onward, driven by the primal need to protect her young. She hauled the heavy sacks down, one by one, her arms trembling with the effort. Then, using a rusty knife, she sliced them open and began stuffing the burlap into the cracks in the walls, plugging the holes against the onslaught. The rough fabric scraped against her skin, but she didn't stop until every visible gap was filled. The storm intensified. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn in stark, fleeting glimpses. Thunder rattled the very foundations of the earth. Clara pressed her back against the wall, panting, listening to the wind's relentless assault. The barn creaked and groaned, but it held. She stumbled back to her children, collapsing beside them, her body shaking with exhaustion. Hope was still crying, her tiny face red and contorted. Clara scooped her up, cradling her close. It's all right, little one, she crooned, her voice hoarse. Mama's here. You're safe. River stirred, stretching and yawning, oblivious to the chaos outside. Clara smiled, a tired, watery smile. Safe. For now, at least they were safe. Under a roof against the sky, a roof she had fought to keep standing. And she would keep fighting. For hope. For River. For a future she couldn't yet imagine, but was determined to build. Whispers of hunger. Weeks bled into a month, marked not by calendars, but by the dwindling contents of Clara's saddlebags. The storm's fury had subsided, leaving behind a world washed clean and deceptively serene. But beneath the veneer of peace, hunger gnawed. Clara sat cross-legged on the barn floor, the rough wood biting into her skin. Hope and River, swaddled in patched-together blankets, lay beside her, their tiny mouths working in their sleep. She held a nearly empty canteen, tilting it back and forth, listening to the pathetic slosh of water. Enough for maybe 2 small doses. She'd have to find more. Soon. She unscrewed the lid of a tin can, its label long since peeled off. Inside was a handful of dried beans, scavenged from abandoned fields before the storm. She counted them carefully, dividing them into 3 piles. One for her, and a smaller portion each for the twins. It wasn't nearly enough, but it was all she had. She chewed each bean slowly, savoring the gritty texture and the faint, earthy flavor. Her stomach growled in protest, a hollow echo in the vast barn. She closed her eyes, focusing on the image of a plump, juicy rabbit roasting over an open fire, the smell of wood smoke and savory herbs filling the air. A cruel vision, born of desperation. A shadow flickered across the barn door. Clara's eyes snapped open, her hand instinctively reaching for the rusty knife tucked into her belt. A hawk circled overhead, its sharp eyes scanning the ground below. A predator, just like her, driven by the primal need to survive. It was a chilling reminder of their vulnerability, of the precariousness of their existence. The hawk wheeled away, disappearing into the vast expanse of the sky. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She needed to hunt, but she couldn't leave the twins. Not yet. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the twins began to stir. Their whimpers escalated into full-blown cries, their tiny faces contorted with hunger. Clara gathered them in her arms, one on each side, and rocked them gently. Their cries pierced her heart, a sharp, agonizing pain. She knew they needed more than she could give them. Milk, warmth, security. Things she'd never had, and now struggled to provide. "Hush, little ones," she murmured, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Hush now. Mama's here." She started to sing, a simple lullaby her own mother had sung to her, a melody passed down through generations. It was a fragile thing, a whisper against the silence, but it was all she had to offer. "Go to sleep, little baby. Go to sleep, little baby. Mama's gonna rock you until the morning light." Her voice cracked, choked with emotion. She hadn't sung in years, not since before she was exiled. The song was a painful reminder of a past she'd tried to bury, a past filled with love and loss. The twins' cries softened, replaced by soft whimpers. Clara continued to sing, her voice growing stronger with each verse. The lullaby filled the barn, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness, a testament to the enduring power of a mother's love. But even as she sang, she knew it wasn't enough. The lullaby wouldn't fill their bellies. Tomorrow, she would have to find food. She would have to risk everything. The fevered breath. The cough had begun subtly, a mere brush against the velvet curtain of Hope's sleep. Now, it echoed through the barn, a harsh rasp that grated on Clara's nerves. Each convulsive expulsion racked the tiny body cradled in her arms. River remained sound asleep, a comforting weight pressed against Clara's side, yet the fever emanating from Hope was unmistakable. A shard of ice pierced the protective numbness she'd cultivated, sharper than hunger pangs or the damp chill that permeated the barn. It was the utter powerlessness that truly paralyzed her. Gently, she laid Hope on their pallet of blankets and touched a tremulous hand to the burning brow. She dampened a scrap of cloth with the last of their water and sponged Hope's face, throat, and chest, the coolness providing only momentary respite. Hope whimpered, her face etched with discomfort. "Hush, little one," Clara soothed, her voice raspy. "Mama's here. You'll be all right." The words tasted like ash, a desperate mantra directed as much inward as to her child. Panic tightened its grip. She couldn't forfeit her, not after everything they'd endured. With a groan from her aching knees, Clara crossed to the far corner, where their pitiful collection of salvaged possessions lay. She rifled through the frayed remains of a feed sack, her fingers flying. Vague memories surfaced of her grandmother, a woman steeped in herbal wisdom, whispering secrets of the earth's pharmacy. A childhood fever, a hacking cough, a brew concocted from something. What was it? Her memory, clouded by exhaustion and worry, struggled to retrieve the specific herb. She conjured her grandmother's gnarled hands, the earthy scent of her kitchen, a steaming pot on the hearth. Then, a flicker. Yarrow. Clara's gaze swept the area immediately surrounding the barn. The recent deluge had scoured the land, stripping away much of the vegetation. She needed to find some now. River, watch your sister, she whispered, resting a hand lightly on his head. He wouldn't grasp the words, but they anchored her, providing a fragile sense of purpose. Clara ventured out into the fading light, the wind a biting lash against her tattered clothes. The air hung heavy with the scent of sodden earth and decaying foliage. She pushed through clinging branches, her eyes scanning the ground, seeking the distinctive, fern-like leaves of yarrow. Minutes bled into an agonizing eternity. The barn seemed impossibly distant, a shrinking sanctuary in the encroaching gloom. Doubt coiled within her like a venomous snake. What if it was all in vain? What if she was too late? Then, a beacon of white, tucked beneath a fallen log, shielded from the worst of the storm, a small cluster of yarrow thrived. Its delicate blossoms, miniature suns, glowed softly in the twilight. Relief surged through her, so intense it nearly buckled her legs. She carefully plucked the leaves and flowers, her hands trembling with a mixture of hope and dread. Back inside, Clara masticated the yarrow into a paste, adding a few meager drops of water from the dwindling supply. Gently, she smeared the bitter concoction into Hope's mouth, the taste eliciting a grimace. "It's good for you, sweet pea," she murmured, smoothing the damp tendrils of hair plastered to Hope's forehead. "It'll make you strong." She continued to bathe Hope's skin with cool water, her eyes riveted to the child's face, searching for any indication of improvement. Hours stretched, each cough a fresh stab of despair. River mumbled in his sleep, but Clara barely registered it. Her universe had contracted to the narrow space between herself and her ailing daughter. The meager fires sputtered against the damp wood, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the barn walls, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous figures. The wind keened outside, a mournful lament that mirrored Clara's own inner anguish. As dawn began to break, streaking the sky with strokes of gray and faint rose, Hope's breathing grew more shallow, her cough more feeble. Clara cradled her close, rocking gently, her voice a hoarse rasp in the pre-dawn gloom. "Don't leave me, Hope," she begged. "Please don't leave me." Exhaustion dragged her under, her eyelids heavy as stone. She leaned her head against the rough-hewn planks of the barn wall, offering up a silent prayer for a miracle, for a sign, for anything to alleviate her child's suffering. The fevered breath still came, uneven and faint, but it persevered. And for the moment, that alone was enough. The scent of desperation. Desperation was Clara's constant companion, as pervasive as the barn's clinging chill. Hope's fever had abated, blessed relief, yet she remained frail, unresponsive. River, fretful and famished, nuzzled weakly, seeking comfort. Yarrow tea was a pittance against their need. They craved sustenance, vitality. And Clara, though every fiber ached with fatigue, knew she must provide. Leaving them felt like sacrificing a vital organ. She swaddled them in the meager warmth of hay and tattered blankets, whispering promises that felt fragile even to her own ears. "I'll return shortly. Just a brief absence. You have each other. Be strong for Mama." The barn door groaned open, revealing a panorama ravaged by the storm's violence. Toppled trees resembled fallen titans, their roots, skeletal fingers, reaching skyward. The air was thick with the pungent aroma of soaked soil and decaying vegetation. Though weakened, the wind still possessed a cutting edge, hinting at future trials. Clara steeled herself, the familiar sting of fear a perverse comfort. It was a reminder of her vitality, her love. It fueled her resolve. They needed restorative herbs, appetite stimulants to replenish their dwindling strength. Her grandmother's wisdom surfaced, a whispered pharmacopoeia of leaves and roots, their healing properties revealed over fragrant brews. Burdock, child, purifies the blood, fortifies the bones. Seek it near water, its leaves broad and textured, like a badger's hide. The creek, her destination. The ground presented a treacherous obstacle course of downed limbs and slick stones. Each footfall was a struggle against the elements, against the insidious pull of exhaustion. The wind lashed at her worn coat, and the cold gnawed at her marrow. She recalled a time, before their banishment, when she had scorned her grandmother's remedies as antiquated folklore. Young and conceited, she had embraced modern medicine, the doctor's potions, the seductive allure of progress. Now, those promises rang hollow, a stark echo in her empty belly. A fleeting image, her grandmother, her face a roadmap of rural wisdom, patiently elucidating nature's delicate equilibrium, the latent power within each blossom. Clara had dismissed her, chafing at the unhurried rhythm of her tutelage, a regret that now pierced her deeply. She spied a verdant patch clinging to the bank of the engorged creek. Dandelion, a meager triumph, yet a victory nonetheless. She gathered the leaves with care, her fingers numb. Then, a flash of amethyst amidst the debris. Burdock, flourishing defiantly beside a prostrate oak. A wave of relief washed over her, almost buckling her knees. This was more than medicine. It was hope incarnate, proof that even amidst devastation, life persevered. As she excavated around the burdock roots, an unfamiliar, acrid scent invaded the earthy aroma of the creek. A metallic tang, unsettlingly sharp. A primal fear, distinct from her maternal anxieties, seized her. The scent of desperation. She straightened, surveying her surroundings. The wind scattered the sound, yet she thought she discerned voices. Her pulse quickened. She gripped the gathered herbs, her gaze flickering between the creek bank and the distant horizon. She saw no one, but the sensation persisted, a prickling awareness of surveillance. That someone or something observed her. She couldn't identify the presence, but one thing was certain. She had to return to Hope and River. Immediately, the return was a frenzied rush fueled by dread. She ran, stumbling, the precious herbs pressed tightly against her. The wind seemed to taunt her, whispering menaces. The barn door emerged from the gloom, a dark rectangle. She flung it open, her breath catching. The twins remained, nestled in their makeshift bed. River whimpered softly, but Hope lay still, eyes shut. Clara flew to them, her heart drumming in her ears. She touched Hope's brow, warm still, breathing. But a detail arrested her. A single print in the mud near the entrance. A man's imprint, and a faint trace of wood smoke lingering in the air. Someone had trespassed and witnessed her absence. Shadows at the door. The air hung thick and heavy, a damp shroud clinging to the valley floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean but teeming with unseen dangers. The medicinal herbs lay wilting in Clara's basket, their potent fragrance masked by the earthy aroma of wet soil and decaying leaves. She hurried back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, the image of that single, ominous footprint burned into her mind. While Clara battled the lingering effects of the storm and the growing unease in her heart, shadows began to lengthen around the dilapidated barn. The last rays of the setting sun painted the valley in hues of orange and purple, a deceptive beauty that masked the predators emerging from their daytime slumber. A pair of eyes, gleaming like embers in the twilight, appeared at the edge of the woods. Then another pair, and another. A pack of coyotes, drawn by the faint, sweet scent of milk and the vulnerable warmth radiating from a barn, began to circle. Their movements were fluid and silent, their padded paws barely disturbing the damp earth. They were lean and hungry, their ribs visible beneath their matted fur, their snouts twitching as they tested the air. The leader, a large male with a scarred muzzle and a ragged ear, stopped at the corner of the barn, its dark eyes fixed on the weathered wooden planks. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a sound barely audible above the rustling leaves. The other coyotes fanned out, their yellow eyes reflecting the last vestiges of light, creating a ring of predatory intent around the small structure. Inside, River, oblivious to the danger lurking outside, stirred in his sleep. He stretched his tiny limbs and yawned, a sound that quickly escalated into a full-blown wail. His cries were thin and reedy at first, but quickly grew in volume and intensity, echoing through the barn and carrying on the damp night air. The coyotes froze, their heads snapping up at the sudden noise. The leader's growl deepened, a warning to his pack. He took a tentative step forward, then another, his eyes never leaving the barn door. The scent of the babies was stronger now, mingled with the tantalizing aroma of Clara, a scent that both attracted and cautioned them. The other coyotes crept closer, their eagerness overcoming their caution. They padded silently around the barn, their noses pressed against the cracks in the walls, trying to pinpoint the source of the crying. Hope, startled by her brother's outburst, began to whimper, adding her own small voice to the cacophony. The leader, emboldened by the growing chorus of infant cries, approached the barn door. It was a flimsy structure, held together by rusted hinges and rotting wood, no match for the combined strength of a determined pack. He tested the door with his snout, pushing against the warped planks. The door creaked ominously, threatening to give way. The coyotes surged forward, their eyes blazing with anticipation. They clawed at the door, their sharp nails scraping against the wood, sending splinters flying. The barn shook with the force of their combined assault, the sound of their snarls and yelps filling the night air. Inside, Clara's makeshift crib rattled precariously. River's cries escalated into desperate screams. Hope, sensing the danger, joined her brother in a chorus of terror. The air inside the barn grew thick with the scent of fear and desperation. The leader reared up on his hind legs and slammed his body against the door, his weight causing the rotting wood to groan. A large crack appeared in the center of the door, widening with each successive impact. The coyotes redoubled their efforts, their hunger driving them to a frenzy. The door splintered and buckled, the hinges screaming in protest. A section of the wood gave way, creating a small opening just large enough for the leader to squeeze through. He paused, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled the sweet scent of the babies, his eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Just as he was about to push his way through the opening, a new sound pierced the night air, the unmistakable crack of a branch breaking underfoot, followed by the frantic thud of running feet. Clara was close, a mother's fury. The air vibrated with a primal scream, a chorus of yelps that ripped through the twilight. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She broke into a run, the dry earth cracking beneath her worn boots. The barn, usually a beacon of safety, was now outlined against the darkening sky like a skeletal cage itself. She saw them then, a swirling mass of gray and shadow, their eyes gleaming like hot coals in the fading light. The coyotes, their leader, larger and bolder than the rest, stood framed in the splintered doorway, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. Hope and River, her babies. A guttural roar tore from Clara's throat, a sound she hadn't known she possessed. She scrambled for a weapon, her hand closing around the cold, rusted prongs of a discarded pitchfork leaning against the barn wall. It was heavy, unwieldy, but in her hands it became an extension of her fury. She charged, a whirlwind of dust and desperation. "Get away from them!" she screamed, her voice raw and ragged. The pitchfork whistled through the air, the rusty tines glinting menacingly. The pack leader, surprised by her sudden appearance and ferocity, hesitated for a split second. It was all Claire needed. She lunged, driving the pitchfork towards it. She didn't aim to kill, only to wound, to scare. The tine scraped against its flank, drawing a yelp of pain and surprise. The pack scattered, momentarily stunned. Clara didn't relent. She stood her ground, a wild woman with a pitchfork guarding her young. She jabbed and thrust, her movements fueled by adrenaline and a primal, protective instinct. The coyotes, emboldened by hunger and desperation, circled, their eyes never leaving her. One darted forward, snapping at her heels. She whirled, the pitchfork connecting with a sickening thud. Another yelp. The battle raged, a chaotic dance of fury and fear under the watchful gaze of the rising moon. Clara was tiring, her muscles screaming in protest. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop, not while her babies were in danger. Finally, with a collective whimper of defeat, the coyotes retreated, melting back into the shadows from whence they came. The leader, limping slightly, cast one last, baleful glance at the barn before disappearing into the undergrowth. Clara stood panting, her chest heaving, the pitchfork trembling in her grasp. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic cries emanating from inside the barn. She dropped the pitchfork and stumbled inside, her heart aching with a pain that rivaled the physical exhaustion. The air was thick with the scent of fear and milk. Hope and River lay huddled together in their makeshift nest, their tiny faces red and streaked with tears. Clara knelt beside them, her hands shaking as she reached out to gather them close. She murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "It's all right. Mama's here. Mama's here." She cradled them in her arms, their small bodies trembling against her. She felt their fragile heartbeats, a reassuring rhythm against her own frantic pulse. She rocked them gently, whispering words of comfort, promises of safety. "They won't hurt you," she vowed, her voice low and fierce. "I won't let them. I'll protect you always." The twins slowly calmed, their cries subsiding to whimpers. Hope, ever the bolder one, reached out and grasped a handful of Clara's hair, pulling gently. River, nestled against Clara's chest, finally drifted back to sleep, his tiny mouth pursed in a peaceful, suckling motion. Clara held them close, her tears mingling with the dust on their faces. She was exhausted, battered, and terrified, but in that moment, holding her children in her arms, she felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was their protector, their provider, their everything, and she would fight for them to the very end. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. The world was a harsh and unforgiving place, and there would be other battles to fight, other dangers to face. But she was ready. For them, she would face anything. The coyotes had shown her the depths of her own ferocity, a mother's fury unleashed. And she knew, with an unwavering conviction, that it was a force to be reckoned with. Kindness in the wasteland. The sun, a tarnished copper coin, bled into the horizon, staining the wasted lands with hues of apricot and violet. Clara, her muscles protesting the earlier run-in with the coyote, secured the barn door with salvage planks. Inside, Hope and River, bundled in the frayed remains of fine linen, issued soft cries, their diminutive faces flushed with discomfort. Hunger, that relentless specter, haunted them. A groan, not the wind's lament, but timber protesting its burden, shot through the stillness. Instinctively, Clara's fingers wrapped around the handle of the rusty pitchfork propped against the wall. Gravel crunched outside, footsteps measured and slow. "Hello." A voice resonated, raspy, yet lacking any harshness. "Anyone about? My wagon's lost a wheel, seeking shelter for the night." Peeking through a narrow gap, Clara observed a covered wagon, its team a single, bone-weary mule, etched against the fading light. Beside it stood a figure, tall and broadly built, face obscured by the shadow of a hat. He bore no obvious arms. Hesitation wrestled with raw desperation. Turning him away meant condemning him to a perilous night, a thought that felt wrong. Moreover, able hands could prove invaluable. "State your business," she demanded, her voice taut. "Jedediah Blackwood, at your service," came the reply. "Most call me Jed. I'm a wandering peddler with goods, tales, and a knack for tinkering." "And you are?" Clara paused. Trust was a rare commodity she could scarcely afford, yet Jedediah radiated a certain harmlessness. "Clara," she offered, holding back her surname. "The barn is occupied. Shelter you may have, under one condition, tranquility." A low chuckle rumbled from Jedediah. "Tranquility's the very thing I crave, Clara. Just respite to mend my wheel and rest my mule." She slid the heavy bar, her gaze unwavering as Jedediah steered the mule and wagon inside. The barn, typically hushed and somber, felt immediately constricted by the vehicle's presence. Jedediah's eyes swept the interior, pausing momentarily on the crude crib tucked in the corner before settling back on Clara. He offered no commentary. "Water can be drawn from the well," Clara indicated towards the rear. "And there's some stale bread, if hunger gnaws." It was meager fare. Jedediah unhitched the mule, offering it a handful of sun-bleached hay from his provisions. "Thank you, Clara. Your generosity exceeds measure. That bread smells like the ambrosia of gods." As Jedediah saw to his mule's needs, Clara remained watchful. His movements possessed a quiet competence, his hands worn, yet gentle. Honesty, etched in the deep lines around his eyes, mirrored her own exhaustion. Later, as Jedediah coaxed a small fire to life just outside the barn, diligently repairing his broken wheel, Clara delivered a bowl of thin broth. The twins slept soundly, their tiny chests expanding and contracting in the penumbral light. "Thank you," Jedediah murmured, accepting the offering. "This is excessively kind." He tasted the liquid, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Sage and rabbit? You possess a remarkable aptitude, Clara." She shrugged, uncomfortable under the weight of praise. The cupboard was bare. Silence descended, punctuated only by the fire's gentle crackle and the distant yowl of a coyote. Jedediah placed the bowl aside. "So," he began, his tone soft, "what circumstances led you to this forsaken place?" Clara tensed. The query was innocuous enough, yet stirred up a maelstrom of painful memories. "A story best left untold," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "I'm a patient listener," Jedediah countered, his voice imbued with understanding. She hesitated, then found the words spilling forth, a torrent of pent-up emotion. She recounted her father's demise, the unjust accusations, the bitter exile, the desolation that had become her constant companion. The details of the twins' paternity remained locked within her, a secret she would protect at any cost. Jedediah absorbed her tale without interruption, his expression hidden by the dancing flames. When she concluded, he simply nodded somberly. "A weighty yoke to bear, Clara." Another silence filled the space, heavier than before. Clara steeled herself for judgment, for the inevitable condemnation, but never came. "And the little ones?" Jedediah gestured gently towards the barn. "They are yours," Clara affirmed with a tight throat. "Hope and River." A genuine, heartening smile illuminated Jedediah's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Beautiful names. They are fortunate to have you, Clara." A mother's love stands as the most formidable bulwark against adversity. He understood. He knew she was alone, raising children in this desolate expanse. Standing, he cautiously approached the barn, peering through a crack in the door. "They are mere fledglings," he observed softly. "They will require sustenance." Clara's heart twisted with pain. She knew his meaning. Nourishment, remedies, garments, necessities she could not readily procure. Jedediah turned back, his eyes reflecting a blend of compassion and resolve. "I journeyed to Oakhaven on the morrow, a small settlement, yet boasting a marketplace, a physician, fellowship. I could convey supplies, food, medicaments, whatever you deem necessary." Hope, a delicate ember, flickered to life within Clara's soul, but distrust swiftly extinguished it. "Why would you offer such assistance?" she challenged, a note of suspicion coloring her tone. Jedediah shrugged. "At times," he remarked, "kindness remains the only currency we possess." He paused, then appended, "Moreover, I sense those little ones are destined to reshape this world." The warmth of his smile touched her again, a wave of genuine empathy, and Clara, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, experienced a resurgence of hope. A spark of trust, a fragile belief that perhaps, just perhaps, she and her children were not entirely forsaken in this desolate realm. Homeward bound, Jedediah left before dawn, the eastern sky bleeding a soft pink as he hitched his mule to the wagon. He promised to return by nightfall, a promise Clara clung to like a lifeline. The silence after he departed was deafening, amplifying the rustle of straw and the soft coos of hope and river. She busied herself cleaning the twins, their tiny bodies surprisingly sturdy now, their eyes bright and aware. The day stretched on, each minute an eternity. Clara found herself pacing the small space, glancing at the horizon every few minutes. Doubt, a familiar foe, began to creep in. Had she been a fool to trust him? Was this some elaborate trick? She pushed the thought away, focusing on the warmth of her babies in her arms. She wouldn't let fear consume her. It was late afternoon when she heard the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Not just one, but several. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Jedediah wouldn't bring this many people. Fear turned to ice. Had they come to finish what they started? She grabbed the rusty pitchfork leaning against the barn wall, her hands trembling but her grip firm. She positioned herself in front of the makeshift crib, ready to defend her children with her life. The barn door creaked open and sunlight flooded the interior. Standing there, flanked by 4 men on horseback, was Mayor Abernathy. His face was grim, his eyes hard. Clara braced herself for the worst. "Clara Walker," the mayor's voice boomed, echoing in the confined space. "I've come to see these children." Clara didn't move, the pitchfork held high. "They're not for you to see." Abernathy dismounted, his boots thudding on the packed earth. He gestured to the men behind him, and they remained outside. He approached slowly, his gaze fixed on Clara. "I've heard stories." "Stories?" Clara spat. "You exiled me based on stories." "I acted in accordance with the law," Abernathy said, his voice softening slightly. "But I've also heard of your hardship, of your resilience." He paused, his gaze shifting to the twins in the crib, and of Jedediah's persuasion. Clara lowered the pitchfork slightly, suspicion clouding her eyes. "What do you want?" Abernathy sighed, the lines on his face deepening. "I came to offer redress." He pulled a folded piece of parchment from his coat pocket. After hearing Jedediah's account, and after much deliberation, the town council has voted to rescind your exile. Clara stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend his words. "Rescind my exile? You are free to return to town, Clara," Abernathy said, holding out the parchment. "The charges against you have been dropped. We were wrong." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, blurring her vision. Years of bitterness and resentment began to melt away, replaced by a fragile hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Why now, Jedediah?" "He spoke of your strength, your devotion to those children," Abernathy said, his voice almost gentle. "He reminded us that even in the harshest of circumstances, humanity can prevail. He also pointed out the lack of evidence against you to begin with." He paused, looking at Hope and River. "Those children deserve a chance, Clara, and so do you." Clara lowered the pitchfork completely, letting it clatter to the ground. She rushed to the crib, scooping up the twins and holding them close. "Thank you," she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. Abernathy nodded, a flicker of something akin to compassion in his eyes. "We'll send a wagon for your belongings. Welcome home, Clara." The journey back to town was surreal. Clara sat in the back of the wagon, Hope and River nestled in her arms, watching the familiar landscape unfold before her. The sun, which had felt so unforgiving in her exile, now seemed to shine with a welcoming warmth. As they entered the town limits, people began to emerge from their homes and shops. Their faces, once filled with judgment and animosity, were now etched with curiosity and something else. Was it acceptance? The wagon stopped in the center of town, near the general store. Abernathy stood there, waiting. He stepped forward, offering Clara his hand. "Welcome back, Clara. We're glad to have you home." Hesitantly, Clara took his hand. As she did, a murmur spread through the crowd. Then, a woman stepped forward, holding out a basket filled with bread and cheese. "Welcome home, Dusty." Another woman offered a knitted blanket for the twins. A man offered to repair her old house. One by one, the townspeople approached, offering gestures of kindness and support. Clara looked around, tears streaming down her face. The years of isolation and hardship had left their mark, but beneath the hardened exterior, a spark of hope ignited. She wasn't alone anymore. She had hope in River, and now she had a community. This wasn't just a return, it was a new beginning.